The Cerebral Entertainment Podcast.
We're back.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to yet another riveting edition of the Cerebral Entertainment Podcast. I am James, and with me, as always, is my good friend Colt.
Yes, sir.
How are you doing today, sir? Sorry about that. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, man. Kinda. We're podcasting on a beautiful Sunday.
I know.
Now, normally I don't complain when we're podcasting,
Yeah.
but it's a beautiful Sunday outside.
Yes.
We could be like playing disc golf
Yes.
or just sitting outside, really.
Enjoying nature at its finest today.
That's actually what I did. As soon as I got up this morning, I woke up to a Marco Polo message
Yeah.
from a buddy of ours,
Okay.
Mr. Joe Burrow. So I went outside and sat on my patio with the birds chirping and the freaking rooster crowing from the neighbor. That thing's gonna find a new home at some point. Yeah, you know, if you want to do your rooster thing at like 6 a.m., that's fine. At 4 p.m., we don't need to hear you.
Yeah.
Just chill out, man.
I hear you. Even at 6 a.m. on the wrong day, it's probably not a good idea.
Right.
You know, you catch me in a bad morning.
Mm-hmm.
But here's a question. This might seem silly. It might be silly, but do we eat rooster? Is that, like, when we get chicken, is that also rooster that we eat?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, is that a legit question?
It is,
don't know.
because I don't either. I've never thought about it. It just occurred to me because I thought when you said to find that rooster a new home, I thought, well, we'll find its home on a dinner plate.
I mean, I feel like people have to eat rooster, right? But do you consider a rooster a chicken?
Well, I mean, it's a male chicken, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
chicken.
Uh-huh.
You have
So-
roosters and hens. For some reason, though, it just occurred to me, it's like, do we actually eat rooster? Or is a rooster different than just a male chicken? Is rooster a general term for a male chicken? I don't know enough about chickens.
Where else do we get chicken nuggets? It's got to be from a male
Okay.
chicken, right?
Okay. Never thought about that, but yeah, that's an interesting concept. So
No, but I did find out something interesting yesterday. I never thought about it, but it makes total sense. So I was talking to my nephew who works for the post office. Did you know that we just like ship chickens all over the world through the post office?
through the United States Postal Service, we do?
Yes.
Why?
I mean,
To feed the world?
no, I mean like actual live chickens.
Yeah, I get it, but what are we doing? I mean, is it just like the chicken trade? I mean, is that a thing?
I guess.
The world chicken market?
I guess there's got to be reasons why you ship chickens.
Huh. Well, I mean,
They also ship bees.
live bees?
Yeah, which was neat. I didn't know that either, but apparently, so like, you know when they use that gas on bees?
No.
I mean, you see it. I don't know where you see it. I know I've seen it. I just don't know. I can't tell you where I've seen
Why
it.
are we gassing bees?
Because I guess it like sedates them, kind of.
Okay.
And then they put them individually into capsules. And then they just put them in an envelope and they ship them that way. So they stay sedated.
Wow.
But apparently you can't, what is it? I think it's like a queen bee can be smelled. Now, this is what I was told. I don't have any research to back this up, but apparently a queen bee can be smelled by other bees from a long way away. So you have to be very careful with if they have a queen bee, because if it gets out, like if it doesn't stay sedated or whatever you want to consider it, if it gets out, they will probably end up with like a massive swarm of bees around the carrier. That's insane.
I thought dogs were the only threat to our postal workers, but now it seems that...
Well, I had no idea that we were shipping stuff like that.
I guess it makes sense. I just, it seems like it would be in a different kind of, like, I don't know, a different kind of service or something. Like, kind of a UPS for bees.
Uh-huh, right.
Yeah. A BPS.
A BPS.
Something like that. Some kind of... more of an animal transport system for chickens
like
and bees.
Yeah, like bees, you'd think they'd have like the whole backside of the truck would be like set up just for bees.
Yeah.
They just have like beehives all around in the back or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, they're just giving them a date rape drug and throwing it in an envelope and putting a stamp on it.
I guess I always kind of thought, well, I guess I didn't really think about how bees were transported. I just thought they flew to places.
That was my understanding. It's like, I don't know if they know their way to where they're supposed to go, but they pretty much do their own travel.
That's a good point. Mm-hmm.
So I would assume that we're sending bees to places so that we can perpetuate the lineage of said bees.
You would think.
Reproduce them because there is apparently a bee shortage, and I'm worried about apples because apparently without bees, we'll have no apples. Have you heard that?
Do you know why?
Because of the pollination process. Bees pollinate, and without bees, apparently, you will not have apple trees to pollinate. Therefore, if you don't have apple trees, you will not, in fact, have any apples.
Okay, so besides the fact of you liking apples a lot,
okay,
is there a reason why it would be detrimental if we didn't have apples?
Well, I don't know. 'Cause I'm not the hugest apple fan. I like to cut up an apple and get that caramel stuff, that caramel dip stuff. That's really, really good. Mm-hmm. But I don't do it very often because if I did, I would weigh 350 pounds. Otherwise, though, I think it would just like for apples to go extinct. Can you imagine a world without apples? Even though they're not like, even if you're not really super interested in apples, just the notion that apples would go away. That's a weird thought for me, and I'm concerned about that.
I mean, I'm not here bad-mouthing apples, but I think the only time I really see apples is like in a store, in a bag.
Do you remember when Eckert's was on 67 Highway? Eckert's
I remember
Apple?
the name.
Really?
Where on 67 Highway? Like up north or south?
No. It was right before you get to Bon Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't remember that? Has it been that long ago?
Maybe.
Wow.
I just never went.
It was a
Maybe that's what
huge,
it is.
like the field now where you can see the primary school off in the distance.
Yeah.
That whole place was an apple orchard.
Wow.
It was vast, and they did away with it for whatever reason. I don't remember what, but yeah, we used to go there every year to pick apples off the trees.
Yeah, I mean,
So there are places where apples actually grow.
Yeah.
They don't just...
I'm just curious if there's an importance behind them, like for survival for certain types of animals or anything like that.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure it's part of a greater ecosystem, connection, some kind of symbiotic connection with other like plants and animals that if we didn't have apple trees, it would be a pretty big deal.
Makes sense.
So I'm pretty sure that's a part of that. But also just the thought of not having apples. I don't know. It's just weird to me. I would feel the same about bananas. I would. I'd feel the same about oranges. Like if all of a sudden oranges went extinct, I'd be a little sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know. It would just be weird.
What kind of apple guy are you?
Well,
Granny Smith, Red Delicious.
I mean, the Red Delicious is your go-to. Like I think that's your most average apple. Like if you're an apple eater, that's the one that you probably eat the most. But the is it the Gaia or Gala apples? Maybe
Gala,
it's got Gala.
G-A-L-A, I think.
Yeah, that's it. Those are good. And the Fuji
Yes.
are also really good.
They're pretty small though, right? Aren't Fuji apples small?
I haven't noticed.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe, but I like the really tart apple as
I'm
well.
the opposite of that. I'm just not big on sour in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, or tart,
Yeah.
really.
Okay.
Yeah, even like candy, I'm not big on the sour stuff.
Yeah.
Like sour gummy worms and
Sour Patch Kids.
and Warheads and all that kind of stuff. It's just not
Yeah.
my. I actually was weird back in school when Warheads were a big thing. I don't know if you remember that or not. You know what I'm talking about by Warheads?
Oh yeah.
So back when I was in school, kids would be eating those things like they were going out of style. And then they came out with the suckers that are like this big around. And they would eat those things until their tongues were bleeding.
Yeah, that's gross.
And I'm like, what is going on? But I like the flavor of them. So what I would do is take like 5 or 6 of them and put them in a glass of water.
Nice.
And let the sour stuff dissolve off of it and then pull them back out and eat them.
That's called ingenuity.
Is
And
it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think that when you can take something that tastes good but causes you pain and you mitigate the pain, I think you've done something. And you maybe should have marketed this flavored water, this Warhead water of yours.
I didn't drink the water.
You didn't?
No, I just ate the candy.
Oh,
I let the sour stuff get off of the candy, and then I ate the candy.
I would have probably still drank the water too.
Ugh.
But you don't like the sour already, or the
Right. Yeah.
And that was my biggest complaint about those types of candies is the damage it does to the inside of your mouth, especially if you eat a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
It make your tongue bleed. The roof of your mouth feels like it's just been like scraped with sandpaper and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's a bad deal. But
Which
yet,
I mean, I get the same thing from like salty because I really like salty stuff.
yeah,
Like I'll demolish a big bag of Doritos or something like that, you know. And then of course by the end your mouth is just so dry and doesn't feel great. And
it's been scraped by the ridges and the sharp edges and whatnot of the chips. That it's tough. It's tough. But I can do that sometimes too. Some chips are worse than others.
True.
Red Hot Riplets, love them. Eat too many of them, you pay the price.
Yeah, for sure.
In your mouth.
Yeah. Is that the only place?
No. That's just where it starts. But I got to give Red Hot Riplets a shout out one more time because as I've told on the podcast before, the story about when I did have COVID,
Right.
my only symptoms that I really had were the loss of taste and smell.
Mm-hmm.
And it lasted for a good almost probably, around 3 days. And it was on that third day. I was getting worried because I really thought when you don't have taste and smell, it really hits home. Like unless you know, you don't know. Mm-hmm. It's like I got concerned that this wasn't, because I'd heard there's a percentage of people who never got their taste and smell back. And I was eating a lot of stuff because my appetite didn't go away. A lot of people lose weight because they can't taste, so they don't eat. Not me. I was still shoving food in my mouth. It just all tasted like cardboard.
Yeah.
But I got, on that third day, a bag of Red Hot Riplets. And I kid you not, it was like I could feel my taste buds just slowly tingling. And I could taste the Red Hot Riplets.
Yeah.
And I give mad props to Old Vienna for bringing me out of that.
Are they a pretty local company?
They're St. Louis, right?
Are they out of St. Louis?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know they do a lot of stuff with a lot of different people around St. Louis. So yeah, I was curious.
At least St. Louis area, but I believe
Nice.
they are St. Louis proper.
Cool.
I do believe so.
Yeah. You know, speaking of that though, the losing the taste and smell thing, I was talking to somebody the other day who actually has a 1-year-old, and the 1-year-old got COVID and got sick, but not like deathly sick or anything. And I asked the person, I said, well, you know, do you know if the baby lost taste and smell? And she said she's not really sure, but if she did, it didn't really affect his eating or anything like that. And that was the first time I really thought about, I've thought about like a baby getting COVID, but it was all, you know, your mind just goes towards the worst avenues when it comes to that.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always thought about. But I never thought about what if a baby gets COVID, but only gets the minor symptoms of like losing taste and smell? How does that affect, like, is that traumatizing to a baby who's, you know, probably only been eating, you know, real food for not that long and all of a sudden loses taste and smell?
Yeah.
Like, do they stop eating? Like, I don't know how that would affect a baby. I'm curious about that.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure because their eating experience, well, they don't have much experience yet.
Right, exactly,
eating,
yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the most part, babies, I mean, if they're, especially with they're drinking breast milk or formula, which I've never tasted, you know, since I can remember, either breast milk or formula. But the formula smells terrible.
Yeah.
There's no way that it tastes good.
Yeah.
So babies, and I would imagine that breast milk isn't coming out like strawberry flavored either. So the babies aren't eating for the sake of flavor at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as they get, when do we start feeding baby food? 6 months? I don't remember.
I don't remember.
It's been too long. But you start feeding them baby food, and the stuff is mushy, the consistency is off, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
My point is, I don't think it would become such a big deal until, in fact, they were starting to eat real food, as in grown-up food.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they start eating grown-up food, and especially if they get a taste of something sweet, or, you know, they just, maybe it's something salty, and it tickles their fancy for whatever reason. I can imagine that would be pretty tough, but they're still so young. I think they probably, in my understanding, would be able to deal with it a lot better than what I did, because
that actually does make sense.
I started to panic, you know, because I've been eating tasty foods for, at that point, 42 years, and all of a sudden I couldn't taste it anymore. It's like, it's not nearly as bad, but it's like, being able to hear all this time and then bam, you go deaf or blind.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking about it though, like a bodybuilder or somebody who lifts, who struggles with eating, like, healthier foods or more bland, like just the dry chicken, the chicken and rice and stuff like that. COVID might be their saving grace on that one.
We might want to look into that.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, brother, have you tried licking that handrail over there?
No.
How about those elevator buttons? Go lick them, see if you can get some COVID.
There you go. Yeah.
That way you can knock down those taste buds, knock them back an inch.
I mean, well, I guess you'd have to know ahead of time that that's all you're going to get.
You take your chances. I mean,
it's a pretty big chance to take, really.
Well, I mean, you're trying to reach your goals. And so if you're going to, the bigger the risk, the greater the reward. Somebody told me that not too long ago. I think it was in the tattoo shop. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember what we were talking about. But yeah, we were talking about.
So it wasn't tattoo related.
Maybe, but not my tattoo related.
Okay.
It wasn't related to me, like taking a risk.
I'm just trying to formulate something in my head that makes sense to how it could be tattoo related.
I can't remember. We were talking. It wasn't my tattoo artist that was saying it. It was the other guy.
Okay.
And we were talking because he was also tattooing a guy like in the chair just across from me. And there was some conversation going on back and forth. At any rate, I wish I could give you more information, but the phrase stuck with me though.
Okay.
The greater the risk, the greater the reward, or the bigger the risk, the greater the reward. It's
but
in a lot of ways that's true.
Yeah, but there's also there's a gray area in there, right?
How so?
Well, I mean, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. But if the risk comes out the opposite way than you want it to, that's the risk. Right, but then there's no reward.
That's the definition of risk. If it's just reward, there really is no risk there.
But that's what I'm saying. Like that debunks the whole saying, right?
No, not at all.
Because there's only a greater reward if the risk pans out.
So here's where we have to branch off here, because if you lower the risk, you're also lowering the reward. There's a direct correlation between the two.
Correct.
Right?
Okay.
And I believe that's what we call a positive correlation. Like when one moves, the other moves in the same direction. Okay, so the greater the risk, the greater the reward. There's no guarantee that you're going to get the reward, but as you up the risk, you also up the chances of getting that. If you do get rewarded, the reward is greater because of the high risk.
Okay.
Still no guarantee that you're going to get the risk.
Right.
But if you just have the reward without the risk, then that completely takes away the risk, right? So the risk, as defined, that's why you're taking a risk. Is because you might not get the reward. That's why it's a risk in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
Can you, off the top of your head, name a time in your life where that exact saying has worked for you?
That's going to be tough to do right off the top of my head.
Where you knew you were taking. I don't have one off the top of my head. The biggest thing I would go to would be like starting a business or something like that.
Yeah.
That kind of, those kind of people, they're making big moves.
Yeah.
With a possibility of coming out with nothing.
I'm still looking for that. I think that really big risk, because one of these days I'm going to put one of these projects of mine that I have sitting and take a risk. I don't know that I'm going to like maybe go as far as to like put my house up, as collateral for like a business loan or something. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I do have some things that I want to try. I can tell you though, the risk that I took going into the field that I went into, in the mental health field, because when I started, I was still just a bachelor's degree level, and I was leaving a pretty stable job in a factory. I'd worked in factories for most of my adult life. And so, but I took a risk with this brand new thing that was still yet pretty much brand new and unheard of in our industry. And that was the program that we do within the facilities that we do it in, because these facilities weren't originally designed for what we do. And I took the risk and I took the job, and the reward has been pretty great, pretty great. Now, it wasn't like a super risk, like putting your house up as collateral or anything like that, but it was a risk because I was going into the unknown, and I still had to earn my master's degree in the process of taking on that new adventure, and was raising two very, very young kids. Bubby was still a baby at that point in time. And so the risk was there. So I guess that would be my example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But otherwise, yeah, I was risky as a younger man in a lot of ways, like being in the wrong places at the wrong time when I knew better, and I probably shouldn't be here right now because I took that risk, but it wasn't necessarily the same kind of risk reward
Right. Yeah.
scenario.
There was,
it was
no
just
reward there. It was just.
yeah, it was just fun, in a lot of ways. It was crazy, and it wasn't always fun. It started out as fun, and then sometimes it devolved into chaos and, oh crap, I think I'm going to die in this situation right now
Right.
because I'm surrounded and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of the situation.
Yeah.
That happened a couple times. But yeah, not the same thing because I wasn't venturing towards some kind of goal, some kind of great reward other than just adrenaline and,
Right.
being able to tell a story. And the bad part is I don't even tell those stories much anymore because even thinking about those old times gives me anxiety. It's like, man, how did that happen? And how did I get that?
Really?
How much? Yeah, it does. Man, even thinking about some of those things, it's just I don't know. It's anxiety provoking. I'm not proud of it. A lot of that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it was interesting.
Well, I mean, you say you're not proud of it necessarily, but are you one of the people that's like, I wouldn't change anything about my past because it's got me where I am now?
No, I'm not one of those.
Not one of those.
Nope. There's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of things I would change. I hear people saying it all the time. You're like, yeah, but it made you the person who you are. Yeah, well, I would have been a person, me still.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been the same. No, but I also wouldn't have some of the trauma that I had. And I probably wouldn't have some of the anxiety that built up because of some of those things that happened.
Right.
Now, if something wouldn't have happened, if something wouldn't have worked out in the same way and I wouldn't had my kids, obviously I wouldn't trade my kids for anything, I should say. But still, yeah, there are some things that, yeah, you just rather they not happened.
Yeah.
You'd just rather that you didn't, not just for my sake, but I'd rather I not put my family through some of the things, some of the worry that they had to go through, and some of the people that were around me, the terrible influence that I may have been to them.
Right.
And the situations that were life-threatening at times. We shouldn't have been there, man. We shouldn't have done that.
It's just interesting. I mean, I know you said it's like anxiety provoking on a lot of that stuff, but interesting to think of like what the domino effect is on a lot of those things. Like if I wouldn't have been here, where would I have been? Or, what, like this situation, how did this lead to this, to lead to this, to lead to this, that goes all the way down to where you are now.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to think about. Would you be the same person if one situation didn't happen? Or, thinking back, is there one situation that has happened in life that for a fact, either you wouldn't be here or you wouldn't be where you are now because of that situation, or
Right.
vice versa?
That it is an interesting topic. Like if I were to say change one of those things that I'm talking about right now, would I be sitting here podcasting with you?
Right.
Would we have ever met?
Right.
Those kinds of things. That's a pretty. I mean, it's such a broad rabbit hole to go down, though, because the possibilities are endless.
Right.
And maybe because there are a lot of theories out there that say what happened is the only thing that could happen. And you kind of get into the topic of free will a little bit there too. It's like, did I really have a choice to do what I did, or have a choice not to had I decided to do differently? You talk to some people and they say no, it's the only thing that could have happened. It's the only way that it could have happened. I have trouble with that. It goes back to my theory of the Goldilocks zone of free will. Yes, I cannot control like the function of my cells at the cellular level, the micro level of myself. There's a system of things, like even on your skin, there's all kinds of these microbes and things like that live on you, that you're just a host to them. I've got no control over all that.
Right.
I also I didn't have control over who I was born to. I didn't get to pick my parents, which I lucked out and got really good ones. I didn't get to choose where I was born, and what culture and race and so on and so forth. But I have to still believe that I make the decisions that I make based off of the will that I have.
Yeah. To me, the only way that couldn't be that way is if your personal thoughts are controlled by something else. That's the only way, because decisions that you make or situations that you get into based off of your own thoughts or your own decisions, unless your decisions are controlled by something else. You know what I'm saying? Like, that doesn't make, to me, that's hard for me to get past too.
Yeah.
Unless we're like in the game The Sims, to where everything we do is being controlled by something else, and we just don't know it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's hard for me to get past too.
Yeah, I think the Matrix scenario could also play into that, because if you're just logged into a computer system, then you're just a slave to that program, And what happens is just it's as real to you as it possibly can be, but there's a program feeding everything that's around you, and I guess that's in you too, as far as your thoughts go. But if you listen rather to someone like Sam Harris, the not the Sam Harris we had on the show, but Sam Harris, the Making Sense podcast, Sam Harris. He talks about, and he's very against free will, but I think he goes so deep into it that it almost like it confounds the mind to where it almost doesn't even make sense anymore. But I get what he's saying to a degree. I'm not nearly the mindfulness practitioner of what he is, not even close. But I know enough about it, and I've delved into it enough to kind of understand what he's saying. So this is his point. When you become mindful and you can really, really just pay attention to your thoughts that arise as they arise, where does that come from is his question. Where does it come from? So in essence, to kind of nutshell this, it's a stream of consciousness. You don't choose what your next thought is.
Right.
Even if I were to say something and it triggers a thought within you, and you feel like you made that decision to make that thought,
right,
to respond, where does that response come from? Like, it just appears into the brain. And when you're practicing mindfulness to that degree, you can actually just kind of notice those things appearing as if they're coming out of nowhere. Like he likes to say, there is no pilot behind the eyes, really. There is no operator back there pulling the levers. It's just your stream of consciousness happening. I get that. I do. But I still believe that, because he says even when you have a thought, and he does a great example. I don't want to remember it right now because it'll throw me off. But he does a great example of where you practice. Okay, I'll do a little bit of it with you, okay, because I think it's apt. Okay, think of your favorite movie from the 90s. Let me make it more general. Think of two movies in the 90s genre, and just whatever.
Okay.
You got them?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Where did those come from? Why did you think of those two movies and not the million other movies that happened?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't really know.
Right. It just appears, right?
Yeah.
I thought of Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore.
Okay.
Just bam, just like that. Okay. I don't know why. That's where they appeared.
Yeah.
I kind of know why, because my point is, and I think he goes a little deeper and kind of glosses over this point. My point is that our minds are slaves to our experience. I didn't think of movies that I didn't see.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
I also, on top of that, I didn't think of movies that I saw but didn't really care for.
Right.
Happy Gilmore and Billy Madison are two of my favorite movies from that time period. So I could have also thought of Ace Ventura, or I could have thought of, a lot of different movies that come from that time period. Seven, they just keep coming from that time period, the ones that I like. I think of those before I think of the ones that I really didn't care for, and then I don't tend to think of the ones that I never saw. So that is how we're a slave to our experience.
Right.
Right. When I touched a hot stove when I was a kid, I touched it because I was still a blank slate as to what that was going to do when I touched the hot stove. Even though my mom told me not to do it, I did it anyway because I had to experience it for myself. And that is the theme of most of my life. I have to make my own mistakes. And also a theme is that I ended up touching the stove again because I wanted to make sure that's really what happened. But now after that, and I was pretty young. I remember it. I was like probably 4 or 5 when it happened. It was traumatic enough, it burned enough for me to remember. But after that, I knew because of that experience that I wasn't going to touch a hot stove. So if there was something hot, my hand would come back from it, right? What was it that caused my hand to come back? It wasn't that I had this innate intuition, don't touch hot. It was that I experienced it, and then therefore the thought came to my mind, don't touch that.
Right.
That's what I mean by being a slave to experience. And so
when you were at least for me, probably more so over like the past 5 to 10 years or so, I notice more thoughts that happen without me doing anything about it. And when it first triggered that was happening, I was I was trying to figure out if there was a reason why I was just now understanding it, or if it was just because I was younger, it wasn't a thing to me.
Right.
It was just like, okay, yeah, something happens, you have a response. That's just the way it goes. But then I guess like when I got older, now I think about that a lot more. Like when something happens, what's my immediate response? And it's like my brain comes up with a response, but I didn't come up with that. Like
Right.
It did it.
Exactly.
And it's kind of freaky, right? If
Yeah.
you think about it that way, because it's like whatever your immediate response was, you personally didn't take time to try to formulate that response.
Right.
Like it just automatically came to you. Where the fuck did it come from?
Right,
You know what I'm
exactly.
saying? Yeah, it's creepy.
And that's to Sam's point.
Yeah.
Is that we are a stream of consciousness and things just arise.
But also like you said, you're a slave to your experience. So like when you do have a response that you didn't really think of, then you actually work through it. Once the response is there, then you work through it and try to figure out, is that the response that I should have? Or, look at your surroundings, or, whatever the situation may be.
Yeah.
Then you look at it and dissect it and find out, is that the response I'm supposed to have? Or should I go this direction or something like
Right.
that?
And I think that that Sam Harris, his logic is useful up to that point.
Yeah.
He goes a step further though, and he says that because you can make some different options there. You can think, okay, well, I'm just going to notice that thought and let it go, let it pass, because when you do, another thought arises. You don't have to do anything; they just keep coming.
Yeah.
And you can choose, if you're mindful, to just notice them and just notice them come and go. Or you can choose to expound on that thought, like you're saying. Let's why did I think that, or what can I do with this thought in order to be productive or make something out of this thing that just occurred to me.
Right.
Sam's point after that is that you didn't choose those things either. The fact that why did you think to become mindful of it and just watch it and let it go, or why did you think to? That's just another thing that's arising in your consciousness as well.
Right.
And the decision that you made is just arising in your consciousness. Whichever that's going too deep for me. I think it's where you lose usefulness of it then. Notice the thoughts that are coming, but then make the decision in that Goldilocks zone of free will to decide what you're going to do with that for it to be the most beneficial.
But that can provoke anxiety too, right? Though, because like if there's thoughts that happen, I think people probably don't, a lot of people don't say some of the thoughts that run through their head, but and I don't know if it's because of experiences or whatever, but you do get thoughts that pop in your head sometimes where you can choose to let it go, but it's just like, why does that thought come into my head? And it's like anxiety, because it's like, why is there like something internally messed up with me? Like why would that pop into my head? Why?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is yes, there is something internally messed up with you. That's the bad news. The good news is almost all of us have that issue.
I know. Yeah.
And that's where we start coming into internal dialogue.
Yeah.
Negative internal dialogue is also a product of our experience. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, let's say for the clients that I work with, for a lot of them, that negative internal dialogue started in childhood because we internalize the physical dialogue, the external dialogue rather, from other people. We externalize that a lot of times, and it becomes our internal dialogue. So, for instance, when someone had a bad parent, so a parent who said, you're stupid, you're worthless, you're never going to amount to anything in life. That child will internalize that, and that will become part of their, what we call self-talk, and that's negative self-talk. And a lot of the work that I do with people is trying to restructure their thoughts, because in cognitive behavior therapy, we learn that triggers automatic thoughts within a person because they formulate this core belief. Their core belief is that I'm worthless. Okay, so we've talked about this before to some degree on the podcast, but then when someone, let's say another person comes up and says, hey, you want to come watch a movie with us? The person's like, no, and they're thinking, the automatic thought is they don't really want to hang out with me anyway because they wouldn't have a good time.
Right.
You map that back to the core belief. I'm worthless. And that comes from their internal core belief, that dialogue they have in their head, the automatic thought, which goes all the way back to their experience. So once again, that core belief, that internal dialogue, self-talk, would not probably have been there had it not been for the caregiver who give them from the external dialogue in which they internalized. That it wouldn't have happened had the caregiver not said that to them and not treated them like that.
Yeah.
And that can come from a lot of different things. A lot of my anxiety as a youngster come from my interactions with other kids at school. And I had to work pretty hard as I grew up to really undo some of those anxieties and social quirks and the things that I was dealing with, because I internalized that stuff. We all do. And that's how we formulate self-talk. It could come from experience too. Say, one of us gets up on the disc golf course and there's somebody there we want to impress. So we just want to, and we flop it and grip lock it and throw it over to the next hole, maybe hit somebody in the head. Maybe they suffer an injury. We might internalize, well, man, I suck, because that was kind of a hard one to deal with. And so that internal dialogue is also based off that experience that we just had.
Right. So what you said, like with some of the people you work with, you have to restructure their thoughts. Give me some examples on what you do to do that.
Yeah, let me, if I said I have to restructure, let me rephrase that.
Well, that's what I said. I'm not saying that's how you said it.
I just want to clarify. That's the process. That's the work we do together.
For sure.
We collaborate.
Yeah.
Because anybody, whoever it is, client in this case, they have to do the actual work. They just need some guidance. And they need the interventions. And that's my job, is to supply the interventions and to keep it going.
Right.
But anyway, your question was, how did they do that? How do we do that? How do we accomplish that? Like
what are some of the I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I'm basically, if you're trying to help a person restructure their thoughts to in a more positive way, what are some of the steps that you're going to take to help them do that? Yeah.
And another thing I do is, because we do work on a more positive way, but I try to stress a more productive or more beneficial or healthy way as well.
Okay.
Because sometimes healthier doesn't always equal more positive, or productive doesn't always equal more positive. So I usually say both, because I usually say hopefully more positive, but I stress the helpful or the beneficial or productive, something like that. I don't know, some of the steps, it just depends on the conversation that you have. You have to, for one thing, you got to be willing to cut yourself some slack. And another thing that I really stress is realistic. So let's talk about an unhelpful thinking style, a cognitive distortion of generalizing. Okay, so let's go back to the disc golf course. So we personalize this to me and you just to kind of make the connection. I throw a disc and I grip lock it and I throw it and I throw it over to the next hole. It really sucked. It's a terrible shot. I might say something like, man, I suck. I always mess up. Okay, so the overgeneralization there is that I always mess up. And a lot of people do this. I was with a client the other day that said, I never accomplished anything. So my first step there is, for the client, I say, no, you've never accomplished anything. So we start digging into that. And then she starts to say, well, I did finish this. And I said, well, did you graduate high school? No, but I finished my GED. So you accomplished a GED. And so we start putting those pieces together, see, because that overgeneralization is inaccurate.
Right.
Okay, so I want more realistic statements, because saying that you never accomplished anything isn't realistic.
Right.
Back to the disc golf course. To say that I always mess up, now I mess up a lot, but we don't have to get into that. But to say that I never have a good shot is basically what I'm saying in essence, isn't true.
Right.
That's not accurate.
Right.
So if I were to say, man, I mess up a lot, or I'm a lot more than what I would like to, then that's more realistic.
Right.
Okay. So what we're doing here, this internal dialogue actually guides our lives. It dictates our behavior. That's why we've got to be careful about how we talk to ourselves, about how we treat ourselves. And the hard part is recognizing when we're doing it. That's the hard part. And that's why a lot of people need a counselor, a therapist, a guide, so that we can work through this, because we're our own worst critics. And we're not used to saying, for me, James, cut yourself some slack, because you're not always messing up. You're not always a bad influence. You're not always, whatever, inject that thing that I'm beating myself up over in that particular instance. I can't overgeneralize. And there's other things, other cognitive distortions that we could talk about too, like catastrophizing. Something happens, it's the end of the world. A lot of people do this too, right? going back to the disc golf course, if I make a bad shot and I'm like, well, this just blew my entire game. No, it didn't. You just had a bad shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can catch those unhelpful thinking styles as they happen,
Right.
you can work on a more realistic, more productive way to assess the situation and inject that thought into your head.
Right.
And it takes a little work. It takes a little practice.
Mm-hmm.
But the product, the finished product, is that you end up behaving according to the more positive, oftentimes, but definitely the more realistic and hopefully more productive thought that you restructured, as opposed to sticking with the unhelpful way of thinking about things.
Yeah.
And this all kind of, this goes right along with internal dialogue, how we talk about ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I would take it one step further, and it's also about how we talk about others to ourselves in that internal dialogue. And there's a lot of different things that we can assess there. Am I putting everyone else up on a pedestal when I'm thinking about them to myself in my internal dialogue?
So as in better than you? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, putting them.
Okay.
Yeah, putting everybody up in a higher place, even though I might not be directly talking bad about myself to myself. If I'm putting everybody else up on that pedestal as if they're better than me, better looking than me, they throw the disc further than I do, or they're a better counselor than me, or a better podcaster than me. If I'm always doing that in my own head, then that could lead us down a bad road of low self-esteem as well, because everybody else is up on a pedestal.
But it's tricky to find that balance in there, right? Because you don't necessarily want the opposite side of that either, where you're like, I'm a better podcaster than that person, I'm a better disc golfer than that person. Like, then it just turns into ego, which isn't really a road you want to go down.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So you want to find, and it's exactly right, you want to find that middle ground, which is the more realistic ground.
Yeah.
Because you're going to find people that are better than you, you're going to find people that are worse than you. Even though, you might have there might be another counselor out there who's a lot better at what they do than me.
Right.
But there are people out there that I'm going to be able to reach that person won't.
Yeah.
There's so much gray area, and there's so much more realistic thinking that we can do, as long as we're not using another unhelpful thinking style called black and white thinking, or all or nothing thinking.
Okay.
It's either all me or it's all them. That's not realistic.
Right.
We both have our strengths, when it comes to being a podcaster. Well, they've got so many more listeners than what we do, or we've got so many more than them, that either we're better than them or they're better. No, that's not. We all have our strengths that we can utilize and accomplish our goals to meet our ends based on the particular talents and things we've got going for us.
Right. Interesting to think about all that, though, and then thinking of the billions of people out there and how everybody thinks differently. And then you try to, put all those people together. I mean, even just your job, especially like me, like I do factory work and stuff like that. It's like, hundreds of different personalities and, people going in and working 40 hours a week together. You're in there more than you're home, so you're just you're dealing with people who, you agree with some things, you don't agree with some things, and you push through, it's just living. I mean, that's all it is. But that's just one example.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just interesting to think about all the people out there, and no matter if you're putting people on pedestals or you think you're better than other people, or they're doing the same things to you, or, and that's where a lot of people might butt heads too, is because you have two personalities where one is ego driven and the other isn't. The other is more thinks that everybody is above them, so it's interesting to think about. And I think having that thinking also about having everybody having different, thought processes and stuff like that, I think that's important to think about too, because you don't know what everybody else's internal dialogue is, right? I don't know what your internal dialogue is. And that's probably a good thing. I really don't want to know what's going on in there.
You don't.
But you know what I'm saying? If you're a room full of people, everybody has a different internal dialogue. So one person might be anxious and, have anxiety about what's going on, doesn't know what's going to happen. Another person is like, I'm extremely confident and I know that everything's going to be fine while we're here, and these kinds of things. And all those people have to mesh somehow.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to think about that stuff.
And a lot of times people do mesh, and then other times we butt heads.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And that's what you just have a clash of personalities, but in a sense, kind of like what you were saying, you have a clash of internal dialogues. Mm-hmm. Because those internal dialogues don't always equal smooth sailing when it becomes external. Mm-hmm. When we have to exude from our personalities and from the choice of words that we use and everything from tone to body language. It's important, like you said, to kind of take into perspective that everybody has their own internal dialogue going on. There's a saying out there also that says something along the lines of, be kind to people because you don't know what kind of internal battles they're fighting. Something that's been very important to me, which not so much anymore, still to some degree, but when I really started to break out of my own shell of, when I was, my school career was just terrible. My public school career was just terrible because I was so shy and timid, things like that. So one of the things that really helped me was to understand that most people aren't really worried about you so much because they're too busy worrying about themselves.
Right. Because
what it feels like to me sometimes is that all eyes are on me. Everybody's watching me. And so every little thing I do is under a microscope. That's anxiety talking.
Yep.
That's self-consciousness.
Right.
And I am a self-conscious person still yet today, but I manage it a lot better.
Yeah.
And I practice more realistic thinking about it, such as, chances are nobody even really is paying much attention to what I just did.
Right.
And that's okay because those little mistakes that I make, I don't have to worry about those so much. Another thing is, I think about people, they're worried about their own mistakes. They're too busy magnifying the anxieties they have about what's going on. They're not even paying attention once again to me. It's because they're too focused on themselves. And that's kind of the human experience. That's the experience that we all have to some degree because we're all trying to deal with it. Not that everybody is necessarily self-conscious, but I think everybody has a sense of self that they're more concerned with because that's how it's the best way to navigate through life to a degree. Not that we shouldn't be thinking of other people. Now, this is where being a good person, I think, comes in too, because once again, everybody's fighting their own battles. But when I can let go of my own anxiety about those little mistakes that I make that I feel like are magnified in a room when there's people there and they must think I'm a complete dumbass, right?
Yeah.
I need to be able to let that go so I can focus on what is important. And that's me being a good person to people.
Right.
One of the things that I didn't understand when I was younger is I was quiet, so people thought I was rude. They thought I was a snob.
Yeah.
Dude, I was anything but a snob. I thought everybody was better than me. Yeah. And so, but I gave across the wrong impression. And when I did that, I missed the opportunity to interact with people. And in my life nowadays, I don't want to miss those opportunities. I want to, because some people need help. They just need a hi sometimes. Hey, how are you doing? They need that because they're fighting some battle that they just need somebody to talk to sometimes. Or maybe it's something where I ended up making a good contact, a good connection with someone, whether it's a friendly contact or more of a semi-professional, whatever, based on the podcast or whatever, or professional contact. I've got to be able to extend myself to those people, and I can't do that if I'm too busy being self-conscious about every little thing about me. So I've got to find a way to let that go.
Yeah.
It all starts with internal dialogue, every bit of it.
Right.
So how do you transform a negative internal dialogue to a positive internal dialogue? It kind of depends on what the dialogue is. So do you have an example of what a negative dialogue might be?
I mean, I guess it's just the first thing that pops in my head is what you already said was like, if when something happens and you're automatically like, I always do this, or this always happens to me, or something like that. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Or just thinking that you're not worthy, or something along those lines for, I mean, anything in life in general, really. Or like, accepting things like when bad things happen, because over time you just feel like that's just your life. That's how life has gone up to this point. So you just accept it now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So just refuting, once again, the hardest part is noticing the internal dialogue first. If there's something negative, start digging at it. Don't let the negative fester. Don't let that be just where you leave it off. We're all going to have negative thoughts, and this goes about other people too. If you're having judgmental thoughts about other people or things that are that are less than compassionate or less than kind about people in general. Start digging into that and start refuting it. Start finding the opposite of whatever it is that negative is trying to lead us down.
Mm-hmm.
See if you can't find some positive about people, especially, people in general. Like, you can pick out some bad people in history and whatnot that there's, you don't even want to try to do that with, really. You can as an exercise, but just people in general, man. Someone cuts you off in Walmart. I was walking behind some people yesterday at Walmart, dude. 2 ladies, and they were not really that old. They may have been somewhere around my age. I couldn't tell. Maybe a little older, maybe 50. They were so slow, and they were walking with a limp, and there was no way for me to get around them. I was pushing a cart. I wasn't really in a super big hurry, but I wasn't trying to be in Walmart either. I'm usually not. Yeah. I can't stand Walmart. I had to go there for something. Rock salt, I think, because it was the only place. Anyway, so I went to Walmart, and I got me some rock salt, but I was behind these ladies, and I had to take a moment to stop myself because my internal dialogue, because their internal dialogue isn't just about us, it's about the environment around us as well. Mm-hmm. And so in this case, other people. And so I had to stop myself and say, you know what, they've got some physical, I don't know if it's a disability or not, but incapable of moving too much faster than what they were.
Yeah.
Right. And so I had to stop myself and realize they got their own thing going, man. If, it's not, don't let myself get worked up over something like that. Mm-hmm. This is not going to make or break me.
Right.
We do that in traffic all the time too. It's like someone cuts us off, someone doesn't use a blinker. If it doesn't cause an accident, then, try to refute that negativity that comes into the brain. It does wonders for us in the long run too.
Yeah, I think technology is going to make that a little harder too in the future, especially when it's scenarios like that, like people basically just people not paying attention.
Yeah.
I think that's going to cause some issues, because now it's not only people scrolling through Facebook while they're walking through Walmart or whatever, but it's FaceTiming while they're walking through Walmart with people, which is, if you do that, I don't care what you have to say or what other people have to say on your phone. Yeah. I don't. It's just like the speakerphone thing. If you're going to walk through a building full of people and you're going to have the speakerphone on, nobody cares what your conversation is. Nobody does.
No.
That drives me insane.
No. But do you not care enough to just ignore it? Or does it irritate you so badly that it just irritates you and you can't refute that irritation? Because that's an internal dialogue in a sense going on right there.
It does. I mean, it depends on how long I have to be around that person. If I can just walk on by, then I can pretty much just let it go and be like, well, that's ignorant that they're doing that, but whatever.
Exactly.
But if I'm stuck in line with that person or something for 5 minutes to where they're just talking to somebody about whatever, then it gets a little bit more under your skin, I guess. Now, once I leave there, I might still have the thought that was ignorant, but I still kind of let it go. But there's an internal dialogue battle going on for sure.
Absolutely. and there's going to be, you can train yourself to where it doesn't come up so automatically, but for the most part, man, we have to deal with those things. What matters is what you do next. It really is. What matters after that first initial thought comes, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Going back to the beginning of this part of our conversation. You can choose just to watch it and let it go, which I do that sometimes too. I'll notice that, hey, maybe some person is morbidly out of shape, right? Really, in a really bad way. And I notice it, but it just goes. I notice the thought and then it leaves. There's no impending judgment. There's no, further dissection of this person's possible lifestyle. I just notice it and move on. It's just a thought. We don't have to dwell on it. And just because I had that thought does not make me a bad person. I in no way, shape, or form would look to hurt that person. If there's anything I could do to help, I would. Right? So, but the thought was there. It is what it is.
Right.
What I choose to do with that thought is what makes a difference.
Right.
And in that case, I think letting it go is just fine because it just happens.
Which letting it go is more important most of the time anyways, I think, versus actually saying a thought that you had. Like I said, most people have thoughts. They just they're not going to say those thoughts, which is weird in a way because it's everybody has these thoughts, right? So even though it's something that everybody always has, it's still something we don't talk about just because it can be a negative thing.
True. Yeah, but I take the point even further a little bit because I don't think it's good to dwell on, like say I would have been just casting aspersions and judgment on that person based off the fact that they were so morbidly out of shape.
Mm-hmm.
That internal dialogue of mine, I feel like it influences my overall behavior, my overall personality.
Okay.
Even though I don't say it, I think that it influences me in a negative way if I let it fester in my head.
Okay.
Because I think even though it didn't surface, it didn't materialize right then and there, that I didn't say something externally, I think that it still causes me to be less than compassionate, and that will surface at some point in my life, somewhere, some way. That's my personal experience. I believe that's the way the human mind works.
So it's important to learn how to know when a thought is negative, and the faster that you can just let that go, the better off you're going to be.
Let it go or mitigate it another way. I'll give you another example. Also at Walmart, I was going to the self-checkout because now, obviously, we're all employed there because we do our own checking out. Anyway, I'm so used to it now that because it's just about everywhere now you self-checkout. Anyway, I was going in to check out, and I noticed that, of course, there's the worker there that kind of does a lot of things. If you're buying alcohol, they, card you or just put their badge up there and roll you through. They're making sure you're not stealing, which is annoying a lot of times because they're at Hawkeye and you half the time. Mm-hmm. And they also refill the bags. The bags, you got the little handles there, and they put the bags on there, and you take the bag and you bag your stuff up. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. I wanted to explain it anyway.
I'm not really sure why, but okay.
At any rate, what happened was I was going to a particular register, and there was like 2 bags. And this internal dialogue started going, and I was just started railing on this person in my head. It's like, well, you've got, not very many jobs to do, and these bags are almost empty. What are you doing with your life?
One job.
Yeah, right, that's it. So I was really just like started railing. I was like, calm down, who cares for one thing? This isn't going to make a difference 10 minutes from now in your life. And so why let that happen to you in your head? Why stir up any kind of negative emotion, negative thoughts? Don't let it fester. That was my first thought, was self-preservation for me. Like, cool your jets, man. Cool your tits. There's no need in getting upset about this. Secondly, I ended up looking at the person. The person, I think, may have had some intellectual disability.
Okay.
On top, I didn't notice up to that point, but I noticed that. So my compassion meter went up even further. And then also I got to thinking, whether they have intellectual disability or not, they're just doing their job. They're doing the best they can, I'm sure. It's not like some teenager who's just looking at her phone and not paying attention to what's going on. Mm-hmm. It's, it's a lady, and she was doing stuff, and so I cut her some slack. Anyway, that internal dialogue, that was the progression of how that went. It started off with me in my head, like railing on someone, mm-hmm. casting judgments that they were lazy or they were terrible at their job or whatever, going, be more compassionate. And then it was like, you know what, and then she ended up coming over and giving me bags. Well, she's like, do you need some bags, sir? And I thought, if I wouldn't have redirected my thoughts before that, her behavior probably would have made me feel like a real asshole.
Right.
Because she come up and ended up giving me some bags, offering me some bags.
Well, that's where Karens come from, right? It's like when you went through all of that within a period of like a couple of minutes, but they don't, right? They come in and it's that explosive, impulsive thoughts, and then they don't know how to let that go before they react.
Yeah.
And then it's like, let me talk to your supervisor and this, that, and the other. And then at the end of the day, they are the ones that look like the asshole.
Right.
But I think that's where it comes from, right? They don't know how to direct the internal dialogue into a positive direction. It's all negative. Or
they don't care to, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
I would hate to be in the mind of a Karen hearing that internal dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably not much room between the internal and the external because, like you said, they're explosive and impulsive.
Yeah.
And they just let it go.
Uh-huh.
One last topic on the note of internal dialogue and how we use it. We've talked about within ourselves, talking about ourselves to ourselves. We've talked about talking about other people to ourselves. Mm-hmm. There's also talking about the environment at large in our heads. The internal dialogue we have about the environment, whatever it is. Whether it's maybe a hill we have to climb, and how we choose to talk about that hill in our heads. how we choose. It's perspective, right? Or having a job to do. I've got either you can say, I have to do all of this work before the end of the day, or you can tell yourself, I have the opportunity to do all this work before the end of the day. And that little shift in the wording within your internal dialogue dictates your attitude toward getting that job done. And you can choose how to approach it, whether with positivity or negativity, with a positive attitude or negative attitude. It's all about the internal dialogue that you have.
I think I do both at the same time on some things. Like, say the yard needs mowed, but I know that I have things going on later that day. But the yard needs to be mowed before I do those things. But I'm excited about the things that I'm going to do later in the afternoon. We're going to go out to the bar or something like that, right? We're going to play disc golf or whatever. So, but in the morning, I'm telling myself, well, I have to go out and mow the yard. But it's like, but then I get to do things because I mowed the yard, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I fight both battles. It's like I tell myself, well, you've got to get this done. But then it's like, but it's better to get it done now to be able to do what you want to do later.
You get a reward.
And then instead of going and doing what you want to do and then coming back home knowing, well, now I've still got to go out and mow the yard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought it was funny that I play both roles somehow.
Well, it's kind of, sometimes you've got to dig deep.
Yeah.
When it comes to things like mowing the yard. Well, I have to mow the yard. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to really just in a flat way say I have the opportunity to mow the yard. I have the opportunity to cut grass. That's so fantastic.
Which technically I could say that because I mean I do live somewhere where I really want to live.
There
and
you
it's
go.
like I walk outside and I love looking at what I have and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I don't like looking at tall grass. So I could be like, well, I get to have this. I have the opportunity of having a yard to mow.
Yes.
This is great. But then I get on the lawnmower and I'm like, this blows.
You took the words right out of my mouth, though. I mean, not this blows part, because I actually kind of enjoy cutting grass. It's just hard to find the time. But the idea that you took out of my brain before I could say it was that I have a house. I have a nice place to live, and I have a nice yard, and I have the opportunity to make it look nice and to own this house, and I have an opportunity that a lot of people don't have, and so
Right.
Cutting grass comes with that. So sometimes it's not just a flat way of saying, I have the opportunity to cut grass. No, you got to maybe, add to the perspective a bit, make it a little bit broader, give a little bit of a bigger picture scenario. But at the end of the day, if you can make it a more positive experience, it benefits you. And once again, the little ways that we benefit, or the little ways that we steer ourselves, redirect ourselves, restructure our thoughts to more realistic, positive, I think you have a net gain across the board. I think it's a tide that raises the ships as you go, not just for that one instance. I think you build on that. It becomes your character, and it materializes, it surfaces in ways that weren't directly related to the thing, because a lot of times, like you said, our internal dialogue doesn't ever externalize, but it does in different ways. It resurfaces in different ways.
And it may not be like through your talking, but like how you act.
Yeah.
Or so your internal dialogue can surface physically, not verbally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. By your actions, your body language, just everything.
Yeah.
I think that we're constantly influencing ourselves through the dialogue that we allow into our brains. Once again, one more time, a lot of that dialogue is automatic, but we have the power. We have that Goldilocks zone. And I think that's why it's so important that part of free will it's just important to me, because we have the choice what to do with that thought. We can let it go. We can redirect it. We can restructure it. Or, for negative thoughts, we can let it go and let it fester. And that's not a good thing.
Right.
Try not to do that.
True.
Yeah. Good stuff, man.
Absolutely.
Peace.